So shifting gears now, our next speaker is Keene, who is at our Williston Research Extension Center up in the northwest part of the state. And looks like Claire is going to be talking to us about Kernza today. So Claire, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So I guess we'll just roll right into it. As Joe mentioned, my name is Claire Keene. I am out at the Williston Research Extension Center, so the far northwest corner of the state. And my talk today is about herbicide options for using Kernza perennial grain. And if you haven't heard of Kernza before, that's okay. I'm happy to tell you about it. And then work that I am doing with some collaborators at other universities with IR4, trying to get some broadleaf herbicides labeled in Kernza. And I'd like to take a minute and acknowledge Eugene Law at Cornell University, Jacob Jungers at the University of Minnesota, and Dave Stoltenberg at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, since I'll be showing some of their data during my talk. All right, let's jump in, please. Okay, all right, so what is Kernza? If we were together in a room, I would love to ask you if you have heard of Kernza. If you have, maybe put that in the text box and let me know, because I'm very curious if word is getting out about it. If you haven't heard of it, it is intermediate wheatgrass, so Thinopyrum intermedium, which you might recognize from forage and pasture situations. Intermediate wheatgrass has been around a long time. It's been planted in the northern Great Plains for well over 50 years. It's very cold tolerant, it's fairly drought tolerant. But Kernza are intermediate wheatgrass lines that have been bred intensively for larger seed size and yield for about the past 15 years, led by lead breeder Dr. Lee DeHaan at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. And then also Jim Anderson, the spring wheat breeder at the University of Minnesota, has been working with Kernza for about 10 years now. So Kernza is intermediate wheatgrass, but lines that have been or are being bred to be more grain producing than forage producing. The University of Minnesota did come out with the first named variety released in 2019 called Minnesota Clearwater. You may have heard of that. There was very, very little seed available in 2019, a little bit more in 2020, and they're hoping to increase the availability of that seed in the coming years. So Kernza is the first perennial grain being brought to market in the US, and there's a lot of excitement around that. Kernza produces grain for about 3 years, maybe longer depending on the environment. We really don't know yet. It does tend to stair step down in grain production, with either year 1 or 2 being the highest yield, and then a step down in year 3. In more arid environments, there may be a 4th and a 5th year of harvestable, but in wetter environments, they're seeing that head production just drops off so much, it may not be economical to harvest after about 3 years. It does need to vernalize, so a fall planting going through the winter, you'd get grain the next summer. But if you planted in the spring, you'd be waiting for a year to harvest grain. The forage stand can last a lot longer. Again, Kernza lines have only been around for 10 to 15 years. And since the interest is grain, people aren't tending to keep them as forage, but that would be an option. The grass stand can certainly persist for 5 to 10 years and even more if it's not subject to some kind of damage or extreme stress. But the harvestable window for grain is somewhere around the 3-year neighborhood. There's currently about 2,000 acres of Kernza in commercial production in the United States as of last year, so not a lot of it out there. But the Land Institute and other partners has the very ambitious goal of doubling Kernza acres every year for the next 10 years. So we really would like to see exponential growth in this crop. The current limitation is seed supply, and then I'll touch a little bit on supply chain and what are we going to do with it, of course. But seed supply has been the biggest factor limiting Kernza acreage growth so far. And I would just like to point out in North Dakota, we do have at least 7 acres of Kernza. I have an acre in a variety trial and about 6 acres in seed production in partnership with the Land Institute. But then we are hoping to get a few on-farm commercial fields going this year. So hopefully we'll get to a darker color of green soon. So also just take a minute to step back and say, Claire, that sounds great, but does anyone really care about this stuff? I've never heard of it. And I'm happy to say that yes, they do. Food companies and consumers are very excited about the idea of an environmentally friendly grain. There's some really great pictures and information on the Land Institute website and also kernza.org if you're interested about the potential of Kernza to store carbon in the soil. So lots of interest from people thinking about carbon sequestration. and also lengthening crop rotations. Just as an indication of industry support, in 2017, General Mills did publicly announce and make a $500,000 donation to the Land Institute in support of Kernza breeding. I want to point out down at the bottom, if you might have seen or heard of Kernza cereal, General Mills has been doing, call it experiments in food science work with Kernza for a number of years, and they were ready to release a cereal. They wanted to release a cereal in 2019 nationally that contained Kernza, but there was not enough Kernza available to make that product happen on a national scale. So they ended up doing a limited release and then selling that with all of the proceeds going back into the breeding program at the Land Institute. So food companies are excited about working with it. But there just isn't enough supply out there to really have it hit grocery stores in a big way yet. Some other products you may have seen: Patagonia Provisions, which is a division of Patagonia Clothing Company, came out with Long Root Ale, a beer that's being brewed in Oregon and is currently in distribution on the West Coast in the Denver market. They would again like to expand that, but they're limited by Kernza available. And then there are many smaller end users doing things like making flour and bread, artisan bakers in Chicago, Minneapolis, some places in New York City are using it. And then there's also a lot of microbreweries that are very excited about Kernza. For those of you in Minnesota or Eastern North Dakota, if you're familiar with Bang Brewing in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, they do have at least one, if not two, Kernza beers on the menu. So a little promo there, check it out if you're in the area. Also, speaking to the interest in Kernza, the state of Minnesota has made quite a few investments in it over the past 5 years, primarily through the University of Minnesota Forever Green Initiative that's housed within their College of Agriculture and looking at improving water quality and minimizing soil erosion with perennial cover on the landscape. And then their Clean Water Fund has also been instrumental in getting Kernza into some wellhead protection acres in the state of Minnesota. And so, yes, there's a lot of excitement for it, but of course, it does have all the challenges of bringing a new crop to market. So where are people delivering it? It is a whole grain that needs to get dehulled, and then just scaling up and making it work. And so there's a new project headed by the University of Minnesota, focused very much on that. That'll be ongoing for the next 5 years. So back to the herbicide part. There are no herbicides currently labeled for use in food use Kernza grain. So most of that Kernza on the market is from organic farms or farms transitioning to organic. So no herbicide or pesticide applications have been made. But the goal of the Land Institute and other partners is to have Kernza grown by both conventional and organic producers, seeing that all cropping systems can benefit from more perennials, and then of course our water quality and other environmental goals benefit from more perennials on the landscape. So I personally would love to see it grown by both conventional and organic farmers. For conventional farmers, certainly a need is broadleaf weed control during establishment. Kernza is slow to establish, like many perennial grasses, so weed control during that first year is challenging. However, if it gets off to a good start, just competition does tend to take over and keep the weeds down in the second year and beyond. So the University of Minnesota, and specifically Dr. Don Wise, is leading the effort to label 2,4-D, clopyralid, and MCPA in Kernza that will be used for food use. So our trial sites, just very quickly. So I'm out here in Williston, North Dakota. Jake Jungers is at the University of Minnesota. Dave Stoltenberg in central Wisconsin, and then Eugene and Matt Ryan out at Cornell in upstate New York. So we did want to make these applications to both established, what I'm going to call old Kernza stands, so that had been in the ground for more than a year, or new seedings that were less than 3 months at the time of the first application. And then also looking at applications in both the fall and the spring. Not all sites had both established and new stands available, so we used what we had. In Minnesota, they made applications both an established and a new stand in fall and spring. Wisconsin did spring applications only in an established and a new stand, and then North Dakota and New York made applications in fall and spring to new seedings. New seedings would have been seeded in late summer or early fall 2019, with the fall application made mid to late fall 2019, and then spring applications in May of 2020. So these herbicide treatments, we were looking at MCPA, 2,4-D, clopyralid, and then a clopyralid plus MCPA combination at 1 or 2x, and then an untreated check. And again, just due to constraints at different sites, not all treatments were applied at all sites, but we did have a good suite applied at each site, and then Minnesota and Wisconsin were able to do all of them. So for visual injury assessment at Wisconsin, no injury was observed in either their old or new stand after spring application. New York, no injury was observed in the new stand after fall or spring application. In North Dakota, I did see just some very low levels of injuries observed 2 weeks after fall application in the new stand, but it grew out of it by the next spring, and no injury observed after spring application. And in Minnesota, some low to moderate levels of injury observed after fall application in the old and new stands, but very little injury after spring application. And, you know, and some of you may be familiar with the fact that some of these growth regulator herbicides are labeled in, say intermediate wheatgrass, in forage and other non-grain settings. And so the point of these trials was to generate injury data that some of the companies wanted to see. And then also, I think Minnesota and Wisconsin will be taking the lead on any residue work that needs to be done to establish food safety use. So we weren't expecting to see much injury, but we still needed to do the trials. So for ratings from North Dakota on a scale of 0 to 10, my fall application, we planted the Kernza in late August of 2019, and then I made the herbicide application in mid-October. The spring application was made in late May. So after fall application, 2 weeks after application, so that would have been late October, just a little bit of injury, 7 months after application. So in May, the following spring, almost nothing, and then had completely grown out of those symptoms by harvest time. So that rating was done early July of 2020, and then hardly any injuries seen in spring 2020. In Minnesota, these are their visual injury ratings in their established Kernza stand, again with a scale of 0 to 10. I will say that after a conversation with Jake, because I was surprised by some of the higher numbers, the student that he had doing the fall rating was inexperienced, so he thinks the numbers are a little inflated. But like the other sites, if there was any injury observed, it grew out of it by spring, and then no visual injury was visible by harvest time, and then very low levels of injury after all treatments were visible in the spring. For biomass production, there was no effect of herbicide treatment on whole plant biomass at North Dakota and New York. Fall timing increased head weight at North Dakota, where dominant weeds were winter annuals. And this data was collected by sampling the total weight of heads in a meter squared quadrat. And I did this slide for a presentation earlier before I had any yield data. So a proxy for yield, the dominant weeds at the North Dakota site were winter annuals, horseweed, and narrowleaf hawksbeard. So those fall applications did help control those winter annual broadleaves, and seem to suggest an increase in grain yield. But thank you to Jake Jungers and his crew at Minnesota. They did thresh my samples, and so I just got this data last week. I haven't done statistics with it yet, but for the grain yield here at North Dakota, so that untreated check had 178 pounds of grain per acre. My fall treatments averaged together were at 285 pounds per acre. The 1x rate of 2,4-D, approximately 350, the 2x rate 250, and fairly similar yields for the clopyralid rates. The spring treatments, those yields were a little bit lower, but still I expect will likely be higher than the untreated check. Again, this makes sense to me. My dominant weeds here were horseweed and narrowleaf hawksbeard, so the fall timing was more effective than the spring timing at controlling those. Unfortunately, though, I did have quite a lot of downy brome in these plots, and I would say my lowest yielding plots were where the downy brome was heaviest, because obviously the broadleaf herbicides used didn't do anything to control it, and that competed with Kernza during its establishment. But the good news is no worrying signs of injury and increased yields where we had better weed control from our broadleaf herbicide products. So current IR4 status, my last conversation with Don Wise is that he does expect the 2,4-D label to come in 2021. He's hopeful that it'll come in time for late summer and fall planting. And then the clopyralid and MCPA labels, those were submitted a bit later, and so they're not quite as far along. They might come in late 2021 or in 2022. And just a picture of the Kernza grain, that's me holding up a threshed sample, threshed but not dehulled sample here in Williston to give you a sense of what it looks like. It is quite a small seed, and again, you can see that hull. And so with that, thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to take any questions. And then again, just acknowledge my collaborators at Minnesota, Cornell, and Wisconsin. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Claire. We've got one question in and another one being asked as well. So first question, Claire, is Kernza gluten-free?
Thanks for asking. I should have said that's probably one of the most common questions we get, and the answer is no. So unfortunately, if you have celiac disease or other gluten sensitivities, Kernza is not going to be a suitable grain alternative for you.
Another question here, were the yields per acre correct?
Yes. So another thing, if you need to get your excitement tempered about Kernza, the yields are not anywhere near wheat yet. The breeders are working on it. My variety trials of Kernza averaged about 350 pounds per acre in 2020, and that was in a year with a severe drought. My highest yielding variety was about 530 pounds. In Minnesota and Wisconsin, where they get more precipitation, they're seeing yields on farm of 500 to 800 pounds per acre. A few farmers that have had a few years of experience managing it have hit about 900, maybe close to 1,000 pounds per acre of Kernza. I hope if I get a lot of rain, maybe I can get up to 5, 6, maybe 700 pounds. But yeah, Kernza yields are somewhere in the neighborhood of a third to a quarter of wheat yields at this time. So the breeders have a long way to go in terms of yield.
All right, a few more questions. We'll ask another couple here since we still have some time. So what was the seeding rate? And then we'll also ask at the same time, where can you get seed?
Yeah, great questions. So seeding rates somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 pounds per acre. So it's a very low rate, like many of our perennial grass species. If you're interested in seed, go to kernza.org, and there's a link for farmers, and you can fill out an application as an interested grower, and that'll go to the University of Minnesota, and it'll basically be an application for that Minnesota Clearwater variety. The Land Institute in Kansas is currently working on a seed distribution network, but the nuts and bolts of that haven't been worked out yet. And the state of Minnesota, also, I'll just say, is prioritizing Minnesota growers currently because the state has made that investment in seed. But if you're a good fit, mention that you have experience growing small grains. If you've done seed production before, mention that, and that'll help get you a little bit higher up on the priority list for seed.